Thomas, and this time I'm building the Orbitron model rocket kit from Estes. This is another kit that came out in 2025 as a series of easy to assemble or E2X kits, and this goes together in about an hour and can be ready to fly about half an hour after that once all the glue dries. So let's go ahead and open this up. Now this is a payloader kit, so we've got this big clear payload section in it. Alright, we'll go ahead and pull that out in the nose. Okay, and then we need the instructions. Here we go. Okay, so this is going to have our parts list. Alright, we found the payload section, the nose cone, and then this part down in here is the coupler for the payload section. We'll pull those apart. Alright, we've got our body tube, and this body tube already has the shock cord and the launch lug installed here. That'll make things go faster. Self-adhesive decals. And then we've got a small parts kit here that includes the fin can, motor retainer, fins, and parachute. And a clear reinforcement tape that's kind of hiding back in there that's on the yellow paper. It looks like we've got everything here, so we can go ahead and get started. Our first task is to assemble the fin can and motor mount here. And these two halves will simply go together like this. Alright, there's some little pegs and little holes that have to go together. This does need glue though, and the instructions show a tube type cement. You can also use a brush on type cement. I like it because you have a little more control that way. Alright, and basically we're just going to put this on all of the edges here. Now be careful, didn't really want that one there. The fin holes here, you don't want to get a lot of glue in those. I'm going to come back and wipe that off here in just a minute. Okay, also be careful that we don't get too much glue on the threads. You need a little bit. Okay. Alright, I'm going to remove that little bit that overdid there. Okay, and now we're just going to match up the little pegs to the little holes. And this should go right together like that. I'm going to hold this for about 30 seconds and then set it aside to dry fully before we go on. As if this is not fully dried, when we go to put the fins in here, it can pop them open. We don't want that. While the glue on the fin can is drying, I'm going to come down to this part here, and we can do parts 1 and 3. 2 we need to wait for the fin can and the fins. So the first thing, if your shock cord is coming out the aft end, the end with the launch lug on it, just go ahead and feed that back through so it comes out the forward end. Okay, and then once it comes out here, we can just pull it through. Alright, now I'll keep it out of the way. And then here we're going to take this reinforcement, and that's going to go over here just to help reinforce the glue that the launch lug was applied with. Alright, here I'm going to try as much as I can to keep it centered. Once this goes onto the body tube, it really can't be repositioned well. Alright, when you've got it where you want it there, then I'm going to smooth down on the top of the launch lug. Now, instead of just pushing that over, first I'm going to take a fingernail here and run that in along the edge so that we actually adhere it to the side of the launch lug and not have an air gap in there. And then you can smooth that down. Turn it around, do the other side in the same way, and then smooth that one down. Now, we're still waiting for glue. That wasn't near long enough. And so we can come down to the next part. Okay, so the first thing we need to do is cut these apart. Okay, so here just take your hobby knife. Don't necessarily try and do it all in one stroke. Right, there I've cut through. There we go. Okay, now this is going to assemble right, just like this, and the instructions are not gluing these into place. They're simply adding tape if we need to. I'm trying to see if there's a reason why. Not really. Okay, so this is kind of up to personal preference, but I've lost a lot of nose cones off payload sections simply because they weren't tight enough. And I don't see any reason not to glue this part on. Now this is, the plastic here is probably either polycarbonate or PETG, I don't know which, probably PETG. And this stuff here is polystyrene, and so we're trying to glue two dissimilar plastics here. You could probably use tube type cement, but in this case I'm going to use super glue, cyanoacrylate glue, the thick kind here. So I'm just going to run a bead of glue, and again, this is optional. I just don't like to have payload sections that rely solely on friction fits. I guess for aesthetics they don't want to see the glue goo. Okay, so here we're just going to put that on and twist it as we go. Okay, and if you don't like the way that looks there, you can actually go in and just get a scrap piece of self-adhesive vinyl or something, and you can put black or any other color on that to hide the glue if you want. Now, we do need to leave the nose part here if you're going to get into your payload bay. You do have to have some way to do that. I would make this as tight as you possibly can. Alright, so it's snug but not tight at the moment. So I've got about a half a circumference of masking tape. Okay, that makes it really tight. And that's what we want here. Alright, so I'm going to set this aside to dry as well. I'm still waiting for the glue on the fin can to completely dry. So I'm going to go ahead here and assemble the parachute. Now mostly this is pre-assembled, you don't need to tie the shroud lines on or anything. Alright, but I'm going to gather all of the shroud lines together here on my dominant hand, just choose a finger there. Alright, and on your other hand you're going to hold approximately the middle of the parachute sheet there. And then you want to adjust these back and forth as much as you can so that you get all of the corners more or less overlapping each other here. It looks like I've actually got a little bit longer shroud line in there somewhere. It's close enough that I don't want to mess with it. Alright, so over here I've got the loops of those shroud lines. And in the instructions, they have us directly tie this to the payload section bulkhead. Alright, so to do that, you would stick these loops through. Alright, and you take the entire parachute, pass it through there, and then cinch that down into a knot on that eyelet there. Now, if you've seen any of my videos, you know that I don't like to directly tie parachutes. I prefer to use snap swivels. Alright, so I'm going to go back here and retighten my lines. Yeah, I've lost them all now here. Let's see. Okay, so just like before, I'm adjusting my shroud lines here, and I've got the loops all in this hand. The snap swivel you can find just about any place that sells fishing supplies. The size really doesn't matter as long as the snap part here is large enough to fit over the eyelet and move freely, which this one does. Okay, so now I'm going to really scrunch my loops down there. I'm going to pass that through the swivel side. Alright, so that's hanging there. I can do one last check and make sure my lines are all the way I want them. And I'm simply going to pass the whole swivel through the loop, pull the loops down, and pull those tight. Alright, now I can give it one last check here. So if those aren't where you want them, you can loosen this up and try again. Right, but if it is where you want it, then you can go ahead and just take a little bit of white glue or wood glue and just put a little tiny dot on there. And then just work that into the shroud lines, and that will keep the knot from coming undone. My fin can has done drying. And so we can go ahead and put the fins on here. They're all the same, so you can just put them wherever you like. So we just pop these in, the wide spots in the slot, and then push those forward. And we need to make sure that the aft end of the root edge here is flush with the back of the fin can there, because otherwise when we put the retaining nut on there, if this is sticking out, it won't go in all the way. Also be careful when going in where we had a seam. If that opens, then stop immediately and re-glue it. Now, gluing is not necessary here because with the retainer nut on there, it will stay in. And that looks like it's trying to split a little bit there. Okay, so I'm going to do two things. One is I'm going to use this very thin, non-viscous type of plastic cement. I'm going to brush that in along the root edges here. And I'm also going to put a small amount on this seam because it tried to open there. The upper part seemed fine. But this is very watery and immediately goes into the cracks there. I'm going to get a little more light on my subject. And also, if you happen to go too far, you get this glue where you don't want it, just let it be and let it dry. It doesn't really show up after it's dried. Okay, so now I'm going to go ahead and do the bases of these fins. It might take two brushes there. Okay, now again, this is optional glue. If you don't have the glue, don't even worry about it. You can just keep them on. Now, I'm going to let this dry for just a few minutes so I don't have glue running anywhere. So I'll come back after this is set. Okay, we're going to go ahead and mount the fin can into the body tube here. The instructions show using a tube type plastic cement. You can use that. I prefer a gel type super glue since we're doing non-same surfaces here. We're going from plastic to cardboard. Recently, a viewer had suggested you could use epoxy for this as well, and you can. Epoxy just is a bit messier, and not everybody has it on hand. So any of those three options are fine. I'm going to go with the super glue here. So using, again, a gel type super glue, we're just going to run a bead of this right along the inside. And the reason I use the gel is because it doesn't absorb quickly into the cardboard. The less viscous forms of super glue tend to soak in really quickly, and they don't form a good bond that way. All right, now when we put this on, we do need to make sure that the launch lug is aligned between two of the fins. All right, I'm just going to rotate this back and forth so that the glue spreads and we get a really good set with it. And I'm just kind of aiming down the center so that this is centered in between. And now I'm going to set this aside to dry as well. My glue has been drying for a while, and we're pretty much ready to put this all together. So first of all, I need to tie the shock cord onto the eyelet of the bulkhead here. Now, if you did the direct tie method with the parachute, your parachute's going to be on here as well at this point. So go ahead and just pull this through. We're going to tie a double knot or 2 half hitches. Alright, and pull that from several directions. And if you notice here, this eyelet's got a little peg sticking out of that, and that's to help keep your shock cord from getting up in between the shoulder and the body tube, which could cause a problem with deployment of the parachute. Alright, so once you've got that all pulled tight, we're going to go ahead and put a little dot of glue on that, just like we did with the parachute shroud lines. Doesn't take much. All right, we'll just work that in. And then we're going to cut the free end here back a little bit, leaving about a 1/4 inch or 5 to 6 millimeters there. We don't want it all the way at the knot because it can come loose that way. But we don't want it long, so that, again, we're trying to avoid complications of the shock cord getting stuck between the body tube and the shoulder there. Alright, if you use the snap swivel method, alright, so we can go ahead and open our snap, and this will go right next to the shock cord. Let's see if I can get coordinated here. There we go, and just snap that back into place. And that's the beauty of using this. So if you need to change your parachute, maybe your parachute got tangled too much or it got a little burnt, this way you can just switch it out quickly. Hypothetically, it should also help keep the shroud lines from tangling, but the bearing in these little guys is not very good. Alright, I'm going to move this out of the way here. For folding the parachute, my new favorite method is to take, first of all, the 2 far corners here and line those up. Okay, and so that's going to fold the parachute in half, and now each of the corner sets is lined up with its pair. Alright, and then we're going to fold these inward. So this corner here I'm going to fold over to lay over the center, like that. I'm going to do the same thing with the other side, folding that over so that now all of the corners are overlapping. All right, we've got this kind of spearhead looking shape. All right, now I'm going to take the midpoint of my shroud lines here and just draw that up as a loop up into the triangle. And I'm going to fold one edge over and then the other edge, like that. Okay, and then I'm going to fold the tip down to the corners. Okay, and since this is a pretty big tube, you go ahead and fold it this way again. The other way is you just fold the edges over and it gives you a long cylinder. But in this case, we actually want something that's a little squatter and wider. All right, so you can do it that way, or you can fold it over this way and do that again. And then you're going to take your shock cord, alright, take all of the shock cord. Now if you're prepping this for launch, crumple up 5 to 6 pieces of recovery wadding or equivalent recovery protection. So if you're using dog barf or something like that, an equivalent amount. If you're just storing it, don't worry about it. And so we get all that in there. Then we're going to put our parachute in, any remaining shroud lines or shock cord there, and then carefully, alright, so we don't want that to happen either. Alright, so we want our parachute and the shock cord not in that shoulder. Alright, and now we're just going to give this a shake. So this should not be coming loose when you shake it, but it should be easily removed without a lot of force. This is good. If it is too tight, first check and make sure you don't have something caught in there. But if that's, if that clears out, then just use a little bit of sandpaper and sand just a little bit at a time the shoulder here. If it's too loose, you can add masking tape to the shoulder, about a half a circumference at a time, and slowly build up, all right, until that fits nicely. Fortunately, my adapter worked just fine. Now, if you do want to paint this, it's not necessary. This is finished in white, but if you do want to paint it, I suggest doing that before you assemble everything. Our last task is to add the decals, and I've just washed my hands to eliminate much of the oils and stuff from the skin, and that'll help keep fingerprints from getting on. It won't eliminate it completely, but it helps a little bit. And then you can refer to the instructions and or the packaging illustration here to look for placement. Now, you can fly this without decals at all. They're not necessary for the flight. You can use a pattern other than what they show on the packaging. You can use different decals. That's all up to you. Now, with this type of self-adhesive decal, they're not very forgiving on these pre-finished rockets. So if you get it stuck on there, a lot of times it won't come back up without peeling the finish. So initially we're going to do this really lightly. Right, and I've got mine facing so that the part that's facing up is opposite the launch lug. Ideally, this will allow it to show the decals when it's on the launch pad. Okay, so I'm just going to very lightly set that down and check for straightness there. That looks pretty good. So when you have it where you want it, you just go down the middle first, and then work your way smoothing it down toward the edges. Now, I've noticed that as these decals age, they tend to peel up along the edges. If that happens, you can use a very small amount of regular super glue under there and just push it back down again. And that seems to work just fine. Alright, this little chevron guy here. I can get it off the backing. Here we go. Alright, so the illustration is showing that about here. I'm actually a little bit lower than the illustration, but that's okay. So again, I'm just going to let that set lightly. That looks pretty good. Same thing. Press down the middle and work toward the sides. Now this last bit is optional and you'll have to have additional materials to do it, but if you want to hide where the glue is here and the tape is here, you can use some self-adhesive vinyl. Now this is just a scrap piece I had from another project, and so I'm just going to run this around. Alright, I'm going to trim that right about there. Okay, and then I'm just going to line this up with the base of the clear tube. And I'm pulling a little bit of tension on it. And that'll help keep it straight and hopefully keep the air bubbles to a minimum. All right, and we just overlap a little bit right there. I'll probably do the same thing later here. I just don't have another scrap handy at this moment. I'll have to make another piece. So I'm going to go ahead and call this done. So here is our Orbitron from nose to payload section, body tube, fins. Don't forget the retaining cap here. Okay, now this is made for Estes 24mm C and D engines. It will not take an E because the E goes too long. But if you wanted to put a larger impulse motor in, you could theoretically use a composite motor. Now if you choose to do that, I suggest doing a swing test and or a simulation in OpenRocket or RockSim to make sure the rocket's still stable, because it was not designed with composite engines in mind. So have a great flight and a safe recovery. And please stay tuned for more of my videos.